Federal MP and former elite soldier Andrew Hastie has told a Sydney court he pities war veteran Ben Robert Smith, whose defamation trial he described as terrible for the SAS and the country. Key points: Mr Hastie was a captain in the SAS on deployment in Afghanistan with Mr Robert Smith. Mr Hastie was a captain in the SAS on deployment in Afghanistan with Mr Robert Smith. He said the SAS would not be able to move forward until the allegations had been dealt with. He said the SAS would not be able to move forward until the allegations had been dealt with. Mr Hastie denied he had used a relationship with journalists to promote himself as a politician. Mr Hastie, the Assistant Minister for Defence, was called as a witness by 9 Entertainment. The publisher of newspapers. The war veteran is suing over a series of articles from 2018. Mr Robert Smith claims they contained false allegations of unlawfulings, bullying and domestic violence. Mr Hastie was a captain in the Special Air Service Regiment for 5.5 years prior to entering politics, including on deployment in Afghanistan with Mr Robert Smith. He's told the federal court there was a widespread view that Mr Robert Smith was a bully, particularly towards a fellow soldier codenamed Person 1. Under cross-examination by the veteran's barrister, Arthur Moses SC, Mr Hastie today denied he disliked Mr Robert Smith. "I pity Mr Robert Smith," Mr Hastie said. "I pity this whole process. I don't want to be here. I was subpoenaed for this." Mr Hastie said it was terrible for the country and the SAS and had touched a lot of lives. "But until we deal with it, we can't move forward." Andrew Hastie has told the court it was a widely held view that Mr Robert Smith was a bully. One of the central allegations in the stories involved an Afghan detainee being kicked over a cliff during a mission in the village of Darwin in 2012, which Mr Robert Smith denies. Mr Hastie has recalled a 2014 pastoral meeting he had with another soldier, Person 7, and the troop sergeant. Mr Hastie said Person 7 was greatly vexed that concerns he had raised about certain incidents overseas involving Mr Robert Smith were not being dealt with by the chain of command. He mentioned swimming over a river away from the rest of the troop. He mentioned an already deceased person on the battlefield, and he also expressed concern about the Victoria Cross citation, Mr Hastie said. The witness said Person 7 said words to the effect that Mr Robert Smith was Father of the Year and was enjoying a high profile in the community. He described soldiers as oral historians and said he heard the cliff allegation from multiple people. Ben Robert Smith, when he was awarded the Victoria Cross Medal. Under questioning from Mr Moses, Mr Hastie agreed he'd spoken with journalists Chris Masters and Nick Mackenzie, who are both respondents in the case, including off-the-record conversations. He described a symbiotic relationship between politicians and the media. Mr Hastie rejected a suggestion from Mr Moses that he had used his relationship with Mr Masters to promote himself as a politician by feeding him information about Mr Robert Smith he presumed the journalist wanted to hear. He denied the same proposition with respect to Mr Mackenzie. The witness said he had a high regard for Mr Mackenzie and a relationship of trust, but said that relationship may fall by the wayside for a good enough story. "Friends in this game, as you'd know Mr Moses, are hard to keep," Mr Hastie said. "I'm sure if there was a story on me he could write, he might well write it." Mr Hastie said he had a love for the regiment and an ambition to preserve the SAS, which could only be achieved by coming clean about some of the mistakes over the last 15 years. Mr Hastie has told the court journalists other than Mr Mackenzie and Mr Masters had previously approached him with questions about allegations related to Afghanistan. "I became the person, the public figure, in the parliament, who'd been in the SAS, and questions were put to me," he said. But Mr Hastie denied he made himself that person. "You held yourself out there as the expert in order to make a profile for yourself, didn't you?" Mr Moses asked. "That's a cynical view, but it's incorrect," Mr Hastie replied. Mr Hastie has recalled a comment a troop sergeant made to him in 2013, which he said he distinctly remembered. He told the court that person said to him, "I'm not going to Afghanistan to put dirt farmers on their knees and shoot them in the back of the head." Mr Hastie said the comment came after they had been discussing rumors or allegations about the way operations had been conducted and left him greatly relieved. "I had a man who saw eye to eye with me. He said he wanted to make sure they were on the same page and was speaking about expectations." Mr Hastie said there was a lot of intuition involved in the discussion and the colleague's statement, but he thought Mr Robert Smith's name had potentially popped up as part of the context. He's also told the court he raised concerns with a superior in 2012 about a catch and release policy in Afghanistan when he suggested the system incentivizes rather than capturing. The trial, before Justice Anthony Basanko, continues.